Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our next event with Riva Lehrer in conversation with Joey Soloway to discuss Riva's new book, Golem Girl, a Memoir. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, which you can find or learn more about on our website by signing up for our email newsletter, following us on social media at Book Soup, or you can follow us right here on Crowdcast. And past events are also available on our YouTube channel. Our next event is scheduled for this coming Tuesday at the same time, 6 p.m., with John Densmore of The Doors in conversation with journalist Peter Frick to discuss his latest book, The Seekers: Meetings with Remarkable Musicians. Tonight's event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. It's right next to the chat area. And if you see a question on the list you'd like for our speakers to answer, please click the like button, and we'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, please support Book Soup and our authors tonight by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book, which you can do by clicking the green button right below the viewer screen. It will open it into a new window so it won't interrupt the program, and it will bring you to our website where you can finish the checkout process. And with that said, let me introduce our guest speakers for this evening. Riva Lehrer is an artist, writer, and curator whose work focuses on issues of physical identity and the socially challenged body. She is best known for representations of people with impairments and those whose sexuality or gender identity have long been stigmatized. A longtime faculty member of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, Riva is currently an instructor in medical humanities at Northwestern University. And this is where everyone would clap if we were in the store. Our other special guest, Joey Soloway, is the creator of the groundbreaking Amazon series Transparent, which received 24 Emmy nominations and 8 Emmy Awards, including 2 for Soloway's directing and 2 Golden Globes. Soloway is also currently developing 3 films: Red Sonja, based on the iconic comic book character, Mother Trucker with Julianne Moore, and Ride, a biopic about Sally Ride. Most recently, Soloway is the co-founder of 50/50 by 2020, an artist empowerment network and strategic initiative of Time's Up, and the founder of Topple and Topple Books. Soloway has published 2 memoirs, She Wants It, Desire, Power, and Toppling the Patriarchy, and Tiny Ladies in Shiny Pants. Other contributions to American Jewish feminist trans culture include the critically acclaimed Amazon series I Love Dick, adapted from Chris Kraus' critically acclaimed novel of the same name. Soloway also was a writer-producer on 6 Feet Under, United States of Tara, and their first feature film, Afternoon Delight, won the Directing Award at Sundance in 2013. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the camera over to our amazing guests tonight. Thank you both so much for joining us. It is truly an honor. And yeah, thank you so much. And everyone enjoy the presentation.
All right, getting settled in here. Hold on, I gotta move it so that I can see you, Riva. There we go. Okay, let me just, hi. Let me just see if I can make you a little bit bigger. Okay, so I hope this seems like I'm looking at you. We were trying to work this out beforehand, but
tried very much. Yeah,
I know. It's the worst, right?
A machitza of ASL here.
Yeah, it's exactly. Anyway, this is a pure honor. That this is one of the things in the COVID coronavirus, as you said, where we're all stuck inside, but then we have these moments where I get to talk to you for an hour and get to talk about your book and get to do so from the privacy of my own home. So there are these other new moments that are being cooked up by this new world, and I'm just really excited to have this time with you. And I guess I could start with my interviewing, but in terms of our connection and how we've crossed paths, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I was a fan of your work before I knew that you were the child of the amazing Elaine Soloway.
The amazing Elaine.
Your astonishing mother, who we're pretty much the same height and we pretty much have the same taste in clothing. So one of these days, Elaine and I are going to go shopping together.
Love that.
I don't have any tattoos, but she is inspiring. And then I came to see you do a gig here in Chicago around the book with Kenny Gadsby, and that was fantastic. And I guess we've had various conversations, but you are you're someone who really clarifies what the culture is thinking about in a lot of directions, and make it both deep enough for people who are thinking deeply and accessible enough for people for whom this information is brand new. And it's very hard to do. And so I just respect you so much.
Thank you. That means so much to me. Thank you so much. That's like my whole goal. That's all I want to be, is that bridge. So thank you for saying that. Well, when I read your book, you know, I said this to you, but I'll just share it with the world at large, whoever's watching, whoever gets to see this, is that I knew from the moment I picked it up that I needed to spend time alone with it. It was like, I opened it, I read it, and I was like, I have to just make time for this book, to be with this book. Because I could just tell from your writing that it was just going to feel that way that you want a book to feel, like you're getting a letter from a best friend. And that's such a skill to be able to do in a way that draws people in, but still, you know, I think just your journey. That's why I'm so interested in the work of female writers, because it's like the autofiction, that your journey. I love Dick. This way in which women are saying, this is where I am, this is who I am, this is what I felt. Sort of just like laying out the evidence of like, I have been here this whole time. And it's just, I went in and I saved it. And then I had an artist retreat. I was alone in the dunes of Truro for 2 weeks. And I just got to read it. And as I've told you, felt the way I did about only a certain other books in my life, that, you know, this book is going to change the world. And also, wow, you're like a double hitter. You can fucking draw and paint and do all that stuff. And you can write in a way that made me feel like writing. So super inspiring. I just want to share my, you know, that was like such a beautiful encounter with Golem Girl.
Well, for the audience out there, Joey hand wrote me this amazing letter and then took cell phone shots of it. And I get this text. It's like, it's this small little letter, and I ran to my computer to like I could see it, and then like crying next to the computer. It was meant a lot to me. You don't, I mean, as you know, you don't know when you tell your story, especially if it involves other people, whether or not it's so specific that no one else can enter it except as sort of a spectacle, you know, or whether it's so general that it's just going to kind of not get in very deep. So you're always kind of trying to be totally inside your own memory and outside of it at the same time. And, you know, I've done a lot of self-portraits, but this was a different way of having, I guess, a species of kind of a double consciousness. But I mean, you've done memoir and you've been doing storytelling forever. I mean, how do you, when you're telling a story about yourself versus one that's about someone else, how is that different for you at all?
Not really, no. I'm always trying to kind of crawl inside the protagonist's, you know, yearnings and replicate it to a place where I feel like I can understand, to be able to mostly direct it. I'm not really thinking about writing these days. I'm writing things for myself to direct, but I'm not really wanting to write so much right now. I'm wanting to direct. I'm making visual art. I'm making like a collage film. I make collages. I'm really liking things that I can do not at the computer.
Yeah, it's funny. I joke a lot that writing is so much easier to clean up than what I do in the studio. It's a lot less hard on the old clothing and the dry cleaning bill. But yeah, it's I mean, I feel really whole when I get to do both things in the same day. Like if I can spend some time in the studio, which is right over there, and you know, here is you're watching right here my writer's retreat, which is a corner of my living room. With, I must say, I brought my golems with me to say hello.
Oh my God, what is that? Who's that?
That is a reproduction of the golem from the oh my gosh, I'm not going to remember the year. I believe it's mid-20s silent film, The Golem, which is an adaptation of a Yiddish theater production. So this is based on that. I always loved the fact that his hairdo makes him look like his mother was the Sphinx, kind of like Stone Page Boy. But
the sort of Jewish monster extraordinaire. He looks sort of like a superhero.
We're not known for our good hair.
What are those?
These are more interpretations of golems. But
are people sending them to you, or do you collect them?
People bring them to me when they go to Prague. I'm always like, bring me back golem.
Just bring me golems.
Cat. Bring me golem cat. Who knew that there was golem cat? I have a t-shirt. Yeah. I have a golem t-shirt. But
my best friend went to Warsaw and all they brought me was the stupid golem.
Well, it's, I guess I was just thinking about how like the visual thing of the studio sort of, leaks over here into the writing area. And I mean, do you have kind of specific work areas in your house where you walk away? And like for me, what's really hard is that I only have a 1-bedroom apartment and my work has completely taken over the entire place. And there's hardly a corner where, except for the bedroom, where I can escape and not feel the tug of work. Do you have spaces in your house? I know this is an odd question, but I was curious if people have spaces that are like the spaces of I don't have to think about what's my internal or external obligations.
Yeah, I have a space in my backyard that doesn't get Wi-Fi, and I can go out there. It's like a little cabin, sort of like behind the house. But I think there's always there's always one thing inside of me that I'm working on. And at this point, I feel like I can work on it in any room. I can take my computer into my bed with me, or I can go downstairs and sit at a desk. The story's more in my head than in a place, in a document. I'm always sort of like, I think, despising having to write something, but only writing because I have to, for some reason. Somebody's saying, turn it in, or I'm feeling so compelled that I have to. I'm driven to describe it.
So like, I don't do very many commissions because I find that when I'm working to spec that I think a lot about, it's going to sound like a weird segue, but so if you look at the history of art, you see in the history of portraiture, the most portraits were commissions. And the artist, I think, is sort of a sock puppet that's there to like fulfill the desires of the wealthy royal person. Make me look like this and make me look wealthy and make me look important and stuff. And so I've always wondered if like formal invention, like playing around with paint, playing around with formal conventions, was a way of getting some like privacy in your head, away from your something just happened. Oh, hello.
Yeah, we're looking at your art while you're talking. Privacy in your head.
Away from your.
Tell me what you mean by formal conventions.
Oh, like there's so many changes over just the history of portraiture, from like very, very formal poses to things that were supposed to be kind of more in the moment. A shift towards more than one person, a shift away from references to religious figures, for instance, looking less like you're some, the king was the god on earth. And so if you were important, you were supposed to look godlike in various ways. And then the shift towards sort of a more intimate individual representation. But, you know, you must, I mean, I don't know that much about your practice, and I know I'm asking you as much stuff. It's always hard for me to talk about my own book.
I have questions for you. I'm ready with questions.
I will shut up in a minute, but I'm so curious about other people's practice, I think, especially someone like you who's also bridging different kinds of not just media, but reasons for doing the work, from like, you know, very personal to I guess more straight up professional, whatever that might be.
I'm not sure. That's not true. I think everything I do is for the same reason.
Which is, how would you describe that?
Sort of thinking that like there's a goddess consciousness that might be ushered in the future if we all play our cards right and do everything you can to make that happen. Like the belief that, you know, the goddess consciousness, that a great maternal energy can save us from all of this. And that just to kind of, and so the goddess consciousness is just the idea of God as love. And so I'm working on Red Sonja. There's a character who is the mother of us all, the goddess, who is asking Red Sonja to be sure her story is told. And so in many ways, I'm doing the same thing. I'm sort of working for the goddess and making sure her story is told through the propaganda I make disguised as, you know. So all these things count because to me, just like anybody who's not white and cis, taking control of the camera is revolutionary.
That's incredible. I would not have known to express it that way. That is so wonderful. I mean, everything I'm going to see from here on out of yours, I'm going to have that in my head. It makes me really happy.
Yeah, that's so. Well, that segues me to wanting to just kind of zoom back to that conversation we were having when we were testing the mics this afternoon, and we were talking about this feeling of, oh, maybe we should stop and talk about Helen Bechdel right here and leave this up because this is so amazing.
Allison.
So, can we talk about this portrait of her and the making of it? Can you tell me about how this portrait got made?
So I'd known Allison to some extent for a long time. And I remembered her coming to Cincinnati, God, you know, in the 80s when she was sort of hand selling dykes to watch out for. I helped establish a lesbian feminist bookstore in Cincinnati. So I was sort of there working at times when Allison would come through and do book work. And then she came through with, I think, Fun Home to Women and Children. And I tell the story in the book of being at this event. I mean, by then she'd become the lesbian David Bowie. And it was just like being in a room with Alison Bechdel was just like disappearing yourself. Like, I no longer exist. I'm just watching this throng of women going, ah, okay, I get it. Yes. But I ended up giving her a ride back to her hotel room and asking her a little bit about what it was like to be just completely mobbed by women with the hots. And she looked really alarmed. Kind of said, "I don't think like that." You're the only one who wasn't thinking like that.
And she's very shy. She's not like that at all.
She's very shy. She's really sweet and very, very thoughtful. She's definitely not someone who says things off the cuff. So I think startled. Sorry, Allison. I think I startled her. But I asked her if she would sit for me. And at the time, I was just starting to write my book. And I was thinking about, I was finding stuff out about my mother and thinking about being a product of my mother's plans for me and my mother's idea of who I was. And I, you know, knew the story of Fun Home a little bit even before she wrote about it, because we had talked about it. And so we were talking a lot about looking backwards at the shadow of our parents and being sort of haunted by their reflection in our rearview mirror. And she was just starting to write, Are You My Mother? So a lot of mother talk. But she also was dealing with the fact that she had stopped doing Dykes to Watch Out For, and that a lot of her constituents were very upset that she wasn't doing the strip anymore. They felt like that had been a really irreplaceable representation of what it meant to be a dyke at this point in time. And so she was dealing with that, and I at the same time had stopped doing work that was entirely about disability, and I was getting some critique for doing portraits of people who did not have impairments, and I had specific reasons for it. But, you know, unless I was standing on a stage somewhere, I wasn't getting to explain why I wasn't at the moment doing work about disability. So there was just sort of some odd overlaps. So when she came to sit for me, we talked a lot. I mean, there were reports that she was going to be Peter Pan. I mean, the first image is never the one I end up going with. You just kind of start with a thread and you're, you know, pulling and pulling. I'm like, okay, what's going to happen here? So I don't remember how we ended up doing this, but I got out this big sheet of foam core and a dowel rod and a dip pen. And I said, do you think you could draw yourself backwards? I was asking her to draw. I think I was asking her to draw herself backwards there, but talking about looking back. So she just very, very intensely had this, you know, dowel rod and the pen and the mirror, and she's looking, and it was so beautiful because I still have in there somewhere the foam core that has the scribbly all over it of trying to do this. So then about the same time, we got asked by a filmmaker who heard that I was working with Allison if she could document our collaboration, which was difficult because, as you say, Allison is a very private person. And I am in a different way. But I'm very private in the studio. Studio is sacrosanct. And I don't even like seeing anybody else on a day that I've had somebody in the studio. I just prefer it to have that person almost like reverberate like a bell through the space for the entire day.
Yeah. And
you probably know what that feels like. And so all of a sudden we had this filmmaker there, and she was trying to be unobtrusive, but it was very awkward. So I was mocking this whole thing up, and I asked Allison, I said, what I really want you drawing, because originally she was going to draw herself as Mo behind her. And you can actually see, if you look really carefully at the shadow, Mo is in the shadow, but it's very hard to see. But I thought what I really want, since we've been talking about our mothers, is I want Allison to draw her mother. So I took a big sheet of tracing paper and I traced the whole thing to scale. And I sent her this piece of tracing paper to where she lives in Vermont. And I just said, here's the space where your mother goes. Don't tell me anything. She said, well, what do you want my mother to be doing? And I said, you know, I'm not going to tell you that. Just she has to fit in this space, and that's all. So a few weeks go by, and I get the mailing tube with the trace on it, and I unroll it, and there is Helen Bechdel. And what was incredible when I put it together is that it's a little hard to see here, but what Helen's doing is she's reading the book. Allison had been giving her mother, Are You My Mother, to read in pieces while she was writing it, and Helen Bechdel almost wouldn't respond. And a lot of the book is about her mother being somewhat distant and withholding, so no big surprise there. But she'd been trying to communicate during this process. So what Helen's doing, oh, and I should say, a lot of Are You My Mother has to do with early ideas in psychoanalysis and Winnicott's ideas of the mother-child relationship. It's very intellectual book. So, so there's Helen, and she's got the book, and she's looking down, and she's got her cigarette. And what killed me, and Allison said she wasn't consciously thinking about this, is that if you look at where Helen's cigarette is, I'm pointing at my screen, I'm not pointing at you. You people out there, you have to go look right now. But if you look at the screen, the smoke coming up from the cigarette. So where the mirror is the only place where Allison and her mother are in the same place. They're not facing each other, they're ignoring each other, or the mother is ignoring the daughter. So the only place where they exist together is in the mirror, but then the smoke inflicts what's called a narcissistic wound across the joining of the mother and the child. The mother is literally crossing out their relationship with her cigarette.
With the smoke. Oh my God, amazing, so beautiful.
I just started to weep. This is why this woman is a MacArthur Genius Grant.
Yes.
Consciously, how do you do that? So that's the story of one portrait. And by the way, the last thing I'll say that you can't really see is that the wallpaper. So Fun Home is about Allison's father, who was a closeted gay man who committed suicide right in front of the house. And he was sort of suppressing his anxiety by completely rehabbing their house, which had been a funeral home. And one of the things he did was he found the original William Morris wallpaper that had been all over this house, and he found reproduction William Morris. So I found the pattern. Which was the cabbage rose pattern, I think. Redrew the whole thing, and then tore it. So in the actual drawing, Allison is 3D. She's on a separate piece of paper. She sticks out away from the drawing, and then the wallpaper is actually peeling off and falling onto the ground in the drawing. And that is in the collection of the Smithsonian.
Wow.
Next time the Smithsonian system.
What a beautiful collaboration. What a beautiful conversation between the two of you to make something so full and so alive.
It's what I love about what I do, is that when it really works, it's so it's like stepping into a poem with someone. You're just in this space together that is really private. I have to talk about it later, but in the moment, it's really private, and it's nothing either one of you could do by yourself.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let me see. I'm going to try to loop this way back to the thing we were talking about this afternoon, because we were talking about this feeling that I had where I had something so in common with you upon reading the book. And as we talked about it, we realized, because one of my parents is a physician, or was a psychiatrist and anesthesiologist. Medicine, science, doctors, a life that operates around good and bad doctors, diagnoses, doctors as God, as this prism that we grew up in and didn't get to question it until later, as we grew into ourselves to kind of reconnect to purpose and pleasure and dignity and these things that are, not medical. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
I would love to. I was thinking about, I hadn't known that your parent had been a doctor. And, I remarked when we talked earlier about how medicine is always insisting on proof, insisting on being the final arbiter of what's true. That, it's sort of like, I was thinking about this after we talked about how, and I don't want to talk about Donald Trump. I'm only going to say that a lot of the explanations that I kept seeing in social media about Donald Trump's behavior sometimes became very medical. Like he has this psychiatric problem. He has this physical, like people were looking to medicine to explain something that they found absolutely incomprehensible. And so leaving him aside, we wouldn't take up any of our time.
Because we must.
So I ask you, as someone who is, you know, been on and probably still in various kinds of complex gender journey, whether, I mean, my impression has always been that for people who are exploring gender identity, that they've had to deal with proving themselves by using medical language, using medical proofs, you know, talking about, I mean, the same way that like queer people have had to argue that it's somehow medically innate, that unless we absolutely cannot help it and we're just born that way, that it's incumbent on us to choose something else. So like medicine is this safe harbor somehow that means that we can't be forced elsewhere. And
yeah,
what do you think?
Yeah, so just like that, the diagnosing becomes sort of, as you said, like an ultimate truth. And I've been thinking not only about medicine, but also about law, that if you want to be able to operate at all in the world, you need to be able to speak law or be able to pay somebody who can speak law. So if you can't speak law and you can't speak medicine, you're at the mercy of those who can. And so that means money in class, and you're paying people, you're paying lawyers, you're paying doctors, and they're kind of like repeating this story back to you through patriarchy. You know, it's like the well-being of your home, your family, your soul, your children is being handed to doctors and lawyers and asking for it back so we can feel safe. Oh, he's a good doctor. Oh, he's the best doctor. I love when I talk to people who are getting anything done, right? This is especially true of Jewish people. They've always found the best doctor. It's always the best doctor. How'd they find the best doctor every time? They're like, this is the best person. My mom checked him out. He's at so-and-so. Like there's a narrative around the good doctor being good luck for the surgery being successful. And so you say the narrative around the good doctor and the best medicine, you know, and through the connections, you know. And so we hand our well-being off to doctors and to lawyers. I'm thinking a lot about lawyers right now in the case of, you know, all these legal stuff with Trump, right? That we're trying to figure out, you know, it's like, why are we even trusting in law? You know, law was written in these buildings built by slaves. It's like law was written by white men to help other white men keep slaves. Why they both law and medicine are just like this, thing meant to objectify us, I think.
Well, both law and medicine both have come up with these languages, and it's one of my problems with high academic discourse is that in each of these categories, they've evolved this language that you have to be an insider in order to decode, or you do not have access to the ideas or conversation at all. And, you know, one of the things I learned as a kid was to quickly learn the language of medicine and how to look like I knew what I was talking about, because otherwise my body was forfeit to whoever decided whatever they wanted to do with it. And, you know, I mean, you grew up, I mean, I grew up with a mother who spoke medical. You grew up with a parent who spoke medical. I mean, what was your relationship to that language as a kid?
I think, you know, all of it stood in contrast to a more grounded center. You know, we didn't have a strong, like, sort of Jewish philosophy. We didn't tell our family the story of ourself. Like, I'm sort of learning now about what a good family is. And we tell ourselves the story of ourselves. We sit at the table and have dinner. We have Shabbat. We celebrate. We show up. We rededicate ourselves, you know, the basics. There was, I feel like, more of a Well, it was it was the time. It was science. You know, it was the Mad Men. It was science. Everybody was. We were drinking powdered milk, and I was eating food called space sticks, and you know, we did imagine computers, and so it was a different time. You know, it was science, and that seemed, and so doctors were part of that. And my dad was a hero to me. You know, we lived between Mercy Hospital and Michael Reese, and doctors and nurses were superheroes. And so, of course, whoever, you know, the doctors that your parents know or, you know, taking your kids to the doctor, whether it was to be weighed or to get growth hormone or all of these things, like I think was almost like a hobby of Jewish moms. The orthodontist, the dentist, the what's going to happen, you know, the exams. It's like, this is part of the childhood.
God, my head is exploding. I just walked around in my life. Hi, Joey.
Yeah, I know. That's what I feel like. That's what I think I really relate to.
You know, one thing that makes me think about talking about the good family is that I've really come to understand that our family didn't explain shit. It's like stuff happened and there was a fight.
Mm-hmm.
The fight was over and there was no resolution or discussion of like how especially between my parents, whenever they argued behind closed door, you know, God forbid you should hear them screaming. And then somehow the fight would kind of be over. But like when I started having relationships, I had no idea how to resolve a conflict. Like I say in the book, you know, if I'd had Dear Abby herself taped to the refrigerator door, like I couldn't have worked that out.
Processing after something that went wrong rather than pretending it never happened. Like I still am working on that.
Science, but you're right, because like science, the language of science and medicine was this like, it was like this externalized place where you could like, and a little bit politics. So it was more my dad, but like, because we couldn't manage anything emotionally as a family, like I think that wrangling things, it's never occurred to me, but all of the medical discussions in our family, not just about me, but about my mother and then my father and extended family members, it was like this arena where you could kind of grapple with things out loud. Because it was kind of, was safer because it was external and there was like some kind of ultimate truth that you could land on. God, I never thought about that. Thank you.
And I think the conversations about it amongst relatives and the talking about it and this is the new doctor, this becomes like, as you're saying, the thing to talk about instead of the caring or I love you or you must be worried or we're going to be fine or we can stop if you don't like it or any of the things you would want like a loving mommy to say. But instead they abdicate to science, they abdicate to the doctors, and then the sort of like myth they're building all day is that they have access to, you know, these superhumans who are much more important than the simple act of, you know, love.
God, that is just, I'm going to be up late tonight thinking about this.
Well, I mean, it's sad. It's like we're all trying to recreate our own lives and ways of being. And then we realize this is, it's just patriarchy. It's like, it's either science, it's math, it's law. We spent so much time seeing ourselves through patriarchy and medicine. It's like every time you realize that, you're just like, God, I just have to start all over. You know, that these ideas that these men and that science are coming to save us.
You know, it's funny though. My book starts with a different point about my family's relationship to medicine, which is that, as you know, my mom had been, I didn't know this until people keep asking me, well, what made you write this book? And I had been writing it as a document about my portrait practice for my family when I was no longer here. It was to help them talk to people or give to whoever needed to understand what I was doing in my portraiture. And for various reasons, I started to think about, well, how did I end up doing this? And thinking about my family. And that led me to start asking people about my family in the family. And I found out that my mother, whom I thought had been a medical secretary, was actually a medical researcher. And I had not known that. And that the research she did, and if you wrote this in a novel, no one would believe you, but the research she did was with this guy named Joseph Workany, who was the father of teratology in America, meaning the father of the study of birth defects.
Wow.
And before that, the explanation for birth defects, or as I call them, birth anomalies or variations, is they always blame the mother. There's this old idea of maternal imprinting. So all the way back, if your mother saw something disturbing, it would cause the baby to be reflective of what she saw or what she felt or what she ate or something, but not in a way that like made any medical sense. It was like, you know, I don't know.
Like the evil eye, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. And so in this funny way, he was the first one to take one of the first to take the burden off of mothers. Of, you know, you have caused this terrible thing to happen to your child. But because my mother worked for him and was one of these very rare women who would have seen a whole variety of birth variations, kids with everything that would have been under the rubric of, is this teratology, meaning teratology literally means the study of monsters. Is one of the reasons why I just happen to have it here.
It is.
Golem girl. It's about my life as a monster. Because I started literally as a monster. Like if you have a teratological condition, that means technically you're a monster. But my mother had seen so many monsters by the time I was born that she didn't institutionalize me. Most of the parents of my generation, when I was a child, were told if their kid had an impairment, you know, intense impairment, that they should just automatically be institutionalized.
Remember that.
Kids with my impairment. And so because of this kind of funny relationship of like working for this guy who's trying to refute the idea that it's all the mother's fault, and you know, and she's there working for him, and I didn't know that.
Why didn't you know that? They just told you she was a medical secretary, but they didn't. Why didn't she tell you about that work?
I don't know. I've wondered that a million times. His mom was proud of her medical education. Maybe she told me and I didn't understand it or something. You know, I'm not sure I would have gotten it as a little kid, what she was telling me, if she did tell me. But it's, again, it's like this, I think of it as this kind of spiral of like, you know, here are women being told by medicine to put their kids away. And then medicine says, well, actually, here's what's causing it. And then because my mother is part of medicine, then she doesn't put me away. But then because she doesn't put me away, I'm there to witness all of her conversations my entire young life with what they were supposed to do to my body. And there's mom making these decisions. You know, it just like, who's in charge? Who's in charge? Her trying to make me more normal because she's afraid of what will happen to me if I'm not normal. Is it the doctors telling her that if they don't make me more normal, then my life will be miserable? Like whose fear is at the center of this? And I'll never know.
You know, maybe it is the fear of the golem.
Always. We're always. That's why monsters have so much power, whatever they are.
The unknown. Yeah, the child as the kind of like object for the mother to have conversations and to work things out and to go to doctors and to say we're done, we're not done, you know. It's such a common thing. It's such a common thing with so many, with kids who are trans, with kids with eating disorders. Even, you know, this question about being neurotypical and having to kind of get the buy-in of your parents, who need the buy-in of their doctors.
I was going to work, long story, but I was starting to work with intersex activist. And the story of what happens to intersex kids is exactly this, where they're born with, you know, non-standard genital morphology. The doctors say, oh my God, we have to normalize this kid or they're going to be miserable. The parents go, oh my God, I can't let my kid be miserable.
Right.
It's operated on and then lied to almost always.
You're talking about Pigeon, right? Pigeon Pagonis?
No, I don't want to say who it is.
Oh, okay. Well, Pigeon taught me, you know, Pigeon, I'm not sure if you heard, but recently they did get the Lurie Hospital to outlaw those kinds of surgeries.
Yeah. Pigeon and I are in conversation.
Yeah, and they loved your book, of course, as well. You know, so yeah, it does connect, I think, a lot of people up, this question of how patriarchy intersects, you know, touches patriarchy and bodies and consent and surgery and who decides.
I mean, once you decided to be public about your gender status, do you feel like when I first came out as queer, what I thought that got me, in part, was that all the messages I'd been given about what a woman was supposed to be, that I wasn't going to be able to be, that the pressure was off because I was entering a classification where that wasn't expected anymore, like being, well, pleasing the men, but also, you know, a mother, a wife, pretty in a particular way, all this stuff. I felt like, oh gosh, I can step away. Bit by bit, that stuff is kind of coming for queer people in some ways. But there was a long period where I felt like I had a lot more space to breathe. Has any of that sort of been true for you in terms of like stepping away from, I don't even know stepping away because that's confronting. I don't quite know how to say it. But do you feel like you have more breathing space?
More breathing space? You mean since I've been identifying as non-binary? A new name? Oh yeah, totally. It's the best. I never knew that Joey was going to bring so much new space for me. It just didn't occur to me. It really didn't. It was just sort of like, oh, I'm kind of bored of Jill. It doesn't ever resonate. It doesn't feel right, but I don't want to do anything about it. But it's not really helping people understand the fact that I'm neither male nor female or both. It's making people think I'm the old person that they knew. So I really just changed it kind of to give people a new name to imprint on, and forgot like, oh, and people are going to have associations with that name, and it's Joey's going to mean something, and Joey's going to be somebody. And to really be able to live in that place where I can constantly and honestly say, I'm neither male nor female. I'm both. I'm either. I'm always changing, like, to mean it and be like, here's my driver's license. It says X. It's like, who could imagine that I could have had such a thing? I just feel so much privilege that I can walk that, walk that line every day and try to really be in between. I feel very lucky.
When you sit for me, we're gonna start there,
I know, I can't wait. I just have to figure out, like, how long do we need? How long do I need to be in Chicago? It has to be after there's a vaccine, right? We gotta
probably, yeah, to really be. But Sam, are you running the pictures? Sam out there? If you can find of the person sitting on the Tinker Toy chair.
Yeah.
I want to talk to Joey about that one. There you go. That is Finn Enke. Unfortunately, my connection is terrible. I hope this is clear for you guys. It's pretty mushy on my end. These are all on my website, by the way. But this is Finn Enke, who is the books editor for Transgender Quarterly and a professor of gender studies at UW-Madison, and a good friend of mine. And when Finn came to sit for me, so Finn and I have been friends for years, and we started to get closer, just to the point that he had come out as trans and was starting to undergo transition. And so we were sitting and talking about his debate about whether or not to take testosterone. And that I said, well, so what will taking it produce for you that you don't have right now? And he said, well, this isn't quite my body. And I said, well, can you show me what your body would be? And he said, I don't know if you guys can see me. He said, my body's here. And he held his hands like a few inches away from his sternum. And all of a sudden I could see his invisible body, like this slightly more capacious self. And so that's where our portrait started. But then we've been talking about monsters for a long time, and he's doing this gorgeous graphic novel about growing up as a trans kid. You'd look at Joey. I want to get you guys connected after all of this, but Finn Enke, E-N-K-E.
I went to Madison too. That's my school.
Oh, well, talk about. But so while we were talking, I've been doing this series where, because I'm interested in the power relationship between artist and subject, or artist and collaborator. And so I've been trying to find ways to push the ethics towards a more an equal level of vulnerability. We're rarely going to have the same level of skill, but we risk other things other than that. So I've been doing this series where somebody comes to sit for me for a series of sittings for 3 hours each. But at the 2-hour mark, I walk out and I leave them totally alone in my apartment, and they have permission to do anything they want. Eat stuff, go through my drawers, steal stuff, and I'll never ask. I never ask. The trade-off is that they have to alter their portrait while I'm gone. And either that or they're not allowed back again. So Finn added the non-binary kid on Finn's knee, and then I was thinking about gender, because we were talking about growing up with toys and how my brothers had erector sets. We all had Tinker Toys, but my brothers had erector sets, and I wasn't allowed.
You're not allowed to touch them because they're erector sets.
Because erection, And so I made this chair for Finn to sit on that's like this crazy cobbling together of Tinker Toys and erector sets. So Finn's like, I think, the third or fourth person I've worked with who's been non-binary. And my relationship to gender is it's in the book, but I always love working with people in that community because it feels spacious to me. Like just being around them, I feel, there's just more air. And it feels kind of magic to me. So anyway, stuff.
Cool. Well, is this the moment where we should ask those watching if they have questions? And if you want to ask questions, you can ask a question and I will ask the question. And while we're waiting, let's talk about this question of portraiture, artists, propaganda, when we're making versions of ourselves instead of, you said that the idea of the portrait was commissioned by people in some ways making propaganda for themselves. That if they're paying, then it's the way they want to be seen. And so when you do the transaction where you give people access to your house and you let them work on their drawing, do you feel like that's a way of sort of informing their consent or giving value to?
I don't work I've done one commission in the last 15 years. I won't do it. All of these, I make a portrait and then I hope to God a collector will buy it. But as when I make it, I don't know if I'm going to be out, could be several $1,000s investment in each piece.
Mm-hmm.
But that keeps me, from flattery world. I feel like if I flatter my subject, because I'm interested in the authentic beauty of variance, that once I start listening to people about how they want to look, we always lose something real about what enthralls me about them. And so I don't work on commission. But still, it's within the history of that tradition. And people do assume that these are commissions, which is a little unnerving. Like, really? I talked them into that. I had to talk them into that.
Do people ask you to draw them without recognizing that it doesn't work that way?
I almost never say yes to someone who's asked me, unless I was already thinking about them, or unless it just makes perfect sense, but it's very rare. Usually, as with you, Joey, it's because I know their work. It always starts with the person's work and how it affects, how their embodiment affects what they produce. That's really the hook for me. It's not even what they look like. It's that relationship between here's my experience and here's how I've evinced it in the world that really fascinates me. But, you know, as time has gone on, I've been trying to cut down the number of, so like when in traditional portraiture, when you would have somebody with their jeweled sword and their, you know, their borzoi and their estate out the window and stuff, and their giant book of whatever, those are called attributes. They're symbols of this person's identity and their power. And so a lot of my portraits still have attributes in them, but I'm trying to push a little bit away from that, and try and keep them as minimal as possible. So like, Sam, if you can find the one of the woman standing with the bondage gear on. I don't know if that's, yes, there. So that's a friend of mine, if that can focus at all, who told me, we had been talking a lot about pain. We have not identical, but similar impairments. We have somewhat similar bodies. And we'd talked a lot about the problem of pain in disability studies, which is a whole long conversation. But I hadn't realized that she was in the BDSM community and that she had evolved a different, very erotic relationship to pain. And so when she decided to pose in BDSM gear, it wasn't because I was trying to say, oh, she's part of this community. It was because this was a really deep part of how she was managing her physical existence. And it was something I didn't have access to. I don't have that. I wish I did have that relationship to pain. Goddess, could you please make it sexy for me? Be great. Let's do that. So this was much more, no pun intended, stripped down. So I'm trying to get pure in my symbolism so that only what's really necessary is in there. But it's if you look at my earlier work, it's just chock full of like information, object information, so much.
I'm going to share with you one of the questions that we just got, which was somebody asking if you have dreams or hopes or feelings about when people walk away from your work, what they take, like what stays? What do you imagine stays?
It's always a hard question. I get asked that every time. On one hand, I would say that if I could reduce my work to an aphorism or a prescription, I don't think the work would be worth much. So I'm hoping it's too complicated to really do that with. The only thing I can ever really say is I hope it makes more space for who you are.
I love that. That's beautiful.
That's good enough for me.
Yeah, I know it's hard to be asked to put that into practice, and it's interesting that you get asked that question. I got asked that question too.
How do you answer it?
I think it's a weird question because I think people are really enjoying your work so much, enjoying who you are. Kind of really, I find people are very just kind of like shocked into a little bit of a new way of thinking, and then they're looking for a specific directive about what to do tomorrow about it. Like, what do we do with this? You're so great. What do we do? And it's yeah, there's nothing really to do except for to keep thinking about the work, I guess, right? And share it with friends.
Yeah, see where it opens something up for you. And, you know, like when you and I were talking earlier, that you tell this giant story of yourself, and then somebody will like catch something that you didn't think was particularly relatable. And they're like, that's my life. There it is. And you're like, really? Think of that? Okay. But you're just happy that like there was something, a hook there that pulled them in and made them feel like, oh yeah, like I can understand something about my own life because I see it in the mirror of this other person.
Yeah.
And that's pretty good.
It felt very familiar and very close. You know, felt very close to you as I was reading it, like it was written from a warm, inviting place.
I hope so. I don't know what you think about this, but one of the big values I have in art is, or my requirements, is generosity. That that there be a kind of belief in the reality of the other person who's in the presence of your work. That you're not, I mean, certainly there are times you want to be not that accessible or make somebody work for it. It's not that I don't think people should work for the understanding of important work. My work sometimes I think is too accessible. But there's a way that what I tell my students is that even if your work is highly conceptual, try and make the object worth the question. Like, even if the object is fairly oblique, do something with it that the person wants to ask a question about it.
That's really interesting. To engage delight or engage curiosity or engage something to invite in. And that's really cool. Yeah. So is it, I think I remember you saying that you're teaching medical anatomy drawing or have taught it at the Art Institute?
For years, I was a professor of anatomy at the School of the Art Institute. I stopped teaching that at a certain point so that I got a bunch of fellowship work for several years. And when I recommended someone else, and when I came back, I just found that I didn't want to start teaching that again.
Yeah.
But I also teach in medical humanities. And with that course, so I talk about it in the book, but I think of it as coming full circle because I work in the cadaver lab. And I love the cadaver lab. I'm actually working on a book now, starting a new book, and it's partly about life in the cadaver lab.
What a great idea. I can't wait to read that.
Cadaver lab and puppets. That's what the book is about.
Wow. Puppets.
Yeah, so they just naturally go together. Anyway,
they go together. Like they're in the Golem category, you know.
Exactly, you got it exactly. But this is fiction. So in the cadaver lab where I work, there's a whole wall of fetal specimens, and they have a whole range of teratological specimens. So fetuses with like fused limbs or missing limbs, or partly fused faces, or missing brains, or extruded abdominal organs, all kinds of things. And and I had been at the Mutter Museum years ago, which is a museum of medical specimens. Anyway, not to drag this out. So what I do is I work with first and second year med students, and I have them, each one chooses a fetus in a vitrine for the term, and teach them to draw the fetus. But while I'm doing that, I'm talking to them about, first off, the ethics of human display. Also trying to guide them through, when you see a human specimen in a museum, it's always there either because whatever is wrong with it, big air quotes, either used to exist, doesn't anymore, or it's not supposed to exist in the future. It's not there because this is what it's like to be human. It's there because this is the wrong way to be human. And so I want them to come out of that. And I make them, their last assignment is they have to go find someone. So like these fetuses are decades old. They don't really do this anymore. These are very old specimens. So they have to go find someone who's lived within the last 20-ish years, who has either the same or a similar impairment, who had a public existence. And they have to do a non-medical presentation, a biography of that person.
Amazing, Riva. Wow, those students are so lucky to have you. What an amazing experience to learn from you, and how beautiful to make so much, art out of the teaching of drawing and science and medicine. That's amazing. Well, I think we've used up our hour, and I love this talk show. I could do it forever and ever. Talking to you is so awesome, and I'm sure we can find more things to talk about later. This has been really my honor.
Oh, Joey, I'm just thrilled. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, of course.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you for writing this book, and thank you everyone for watching us. And obviously, if you haven't read the book,
yes. Booksub has it, and
we do have it, and we will have signed book plates. So please, please, especially get your copy from us, and we will get those soon. And so with COVID and shipping, it might take a little bit, but it will be worth it. So thank you everyone so much for watching. Oh yes, and it will have a little piece of art with it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And Riva and Joey, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much to our ASL interpreters, Hillary and Javi. Thank you both so much for joining us. And it was an honor to have you, and gorgeous art. So thank you for sharing it with the world.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful night.
I just want to say a special thank you to the interpreters.
Yes, thank you.
That you were here.
Yeah, you did an amazing job.
Thank you. Night, everyone.
Good night.